The year was 1815, and London wore its winter like a crown of frost, gleaming, brittle, and full of whispered secrets. Beneath the pale morning light, St. George's Chapel stood dressed in holly and gold, its bells tolling with solemn grace for a union the ton had awaited with hungry curiosity. The Duke of Ravenshire was to wed. Society called him the most desired man in England, a warrior of Waterloo, heir to ancient fortune, and a man whose beauty, even when shadowed by melancholy, had once made debutantes blush behind their fans. But that morning, as he stood before the altar, his expression was carved from ice. Lady Eleanor Whitmore approached on her father's arm, her pale blue gown trailing like mist across the marble aisle. She was no stranger to whispers either, gentle, dutiful, too earnest for London's cruel laughter. She had loved the Duke from afar for years, ever since he had danced with her only once at a charity ball. That single waltz had lived in her memory like a dream stitched in silk. Yet now, as she neared him, she sensed the truth that her heart refused to accept. He did not look at her, not even once. His gaze was fixed somewhere beyond the vaulted ceiling, as though the vows he was about to take were merely an obligation carved in stone. The priest's voice filled the chapel, measured and holy, but Eleanor could feel the tension beneath the ritual, an invisible battle between pride and despair. The Duke's voice, deep and restrained, spoke his vows without faltering, yet each word carried no warmth. When it was her turn, Eleanor's lips trembled, but she steadied them. "I take thee," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "to have and to hold." For a fleeting moment she thought she saw a flicker in his eyes, a shadow of something human, wounded, almost tender, but it vanished before her heart could claim it. The guests murmured approval when the ceremony ended, though their smiles were thin. The Duke bowed, brushed his lips against her gloved hand with mechanical grace, and turned toward the grand doors before the final hymn had faded. Eleanor stood beside him, a duchess now, and yet she felt smaller than she had ever felt in her life. The wedding breakfast at Ravenshire House was lavish but cold. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbows over untouched champagne glasses. Nobility mingled, speaking of politics and gowns, pretending not to notice the chasm between the newlyweds. Lady Agatha, Eleanor's aunt, leaned toward another guest and whispered, "He married her out of duty, not devotion." Poor child, Ravenshire's heart was buried with Lady Beatrice. The words reached Eleanor's ears like shards of glass, though her expression never betrayed it. She smiled politely, thanked the guests, and met her husband's distant gaze across the table. He raised his glass with impeccable composure and drank without speaking. When evening came, the carriages departed one by one, carrying gossip into the lamplit streets of Mayfair. The Duke stood by the window, watching the snowfall gather on the iron railings below. Eleanor entered the room quietly. The fire cast a warm glow over her face, softening the nervous tremor of her lips. "Your Grace," she said gently, "I wish to thank you for fulfilling your promise to my father." He turned, his expression unreadable. "It was necessary," he replied. "A duke must see to his lineage." The word struck her like a physical blow, but she held her composure. "Is that all I am to you? A necessity?" she asked, her voice fragile yet dignified. His jaw tightened. "Eleanor, I have given you my name, my protection, and my estate. Do not ask for what I cannot give." There was a long silence. The clock on the mantel ticked with cruel precision. Finally, she whispered, "I did not ask for love, Your Grace, only for kindness." Something flickered in his eyes again, a flash of regret, or memory, but he turned away before it could take root. "Kindness," he said quietly. "It is a luxury I no longer possess." Later that night, as the house fell silent, he came to her chamber. The moment was brief, tender only in the way sorrow can be tender. He touched her hand as though afraid of its warmth, his lips brushing hers like a vow half forgotten. When morning broke, the bed beside her was cold. Through the window, Eleanor saw the Duke's carriage waiting in the courtyard, horses stamping against the frost. She rose, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders, and descended the grand staircase. He stood at the door, his coat perfectly fitted, his hat in his gloved hand. "You are leaving?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart thundered. He nodded once. "London requires my attention. Affairs of the estate and Parliament." He hesitated, as if weighing mercy against pride. "You will be comfortable here. The staff will see to your needs." Eleanor lifted her chin. "And what of my husband's?" He met her gaze for the first time, truly met it, and for an instant something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of all that could have been, and all that was already lost. "Do not concern yourself with me," he said softly. "It is better this way." The carriage door closed with a sound that echoed through the courtyard like a final sentence. She watched as he rode away into the fog, the crest of Ravenshire glinting on the door before it vanished from sight. In the stillness that followed, Eleanor stood alone beneath the stone archway, her breath rising in pale clouds. The wind tugged at her veil, lifting it like a ghost's hand before it fell against her cheek. Somewhere within the great house, the clock struck 8, its chime both solemn and accusing. She turned slowly, her footsteps echoing through the marble hall. Servants bowed their heads as she passed, pity softening their eyes, but she did not falter. If her husband had chosen distance, she would choose dignity. As she entered the empty drawing-room, she paused before the great mirror above the fireplace. The reflection that stared back was not the timid girl who had once dreamed of love, but a woman bound by vows colder than gold. She reached up, removed her wedding veil, and laid it across the chair. Outside, the snow fell thicker, covering the city in silence. Somewhere in the distance, the bells of St. George's tolled for another wedding, another promise of joy. But in the quiet halls of Ravenshire House, the Duchess stood utterly still, the last warmth of her wedding day fading into the winter night. And though her heart ached, a single thought began to form within her, a thought that would one day change everything. "If he has taken his heart from me, I shall learn to live with mine alone." The fire crackled softly behind her, and with it, the first spark of her resolve. The days after his departure unfurled in silence, each one identical to the last, like pages of a book written in invisible ink. Ravenshire Manor, vast and elegant, had never seemed so hollow. The echo of his footsteps had faded, yet his absence filled every corridor. Lady Eleanor rose early each morning, performing her duties with quiet precision, the image of a dutiful duchess, but behind her poise lingered an ache that refused to die. The Duke had not written once. No message, no instruction, not even a perfunctory inquiry about her well-being. London had swallowed him whole. In the early months of their marriage, visitors had come, well-wishers, curious neighbors, and the occasional ambitious mother with her fluttering daughters. They arrived with polite smiles
and thinly veiled questions. "Is His Grace expected home soon?" they would ask, their voices syrup-sweet. Eleanor would answer gently, always the same, "When his affairs allow." After a time, even curiosity grew bored of kindness. Invitations ceased. Gossip replaced sympathy. The Duchess became a subject of drawing-room speculation rather than attendance. It was in this hush that Eleanor began to see the truth of her new world. A title could gild a woman's loneliness but could never cure it. The servants, loyal but cautious, treated her with reverence, yet she caught the fleeting looks of pity when they thought she did not see. One morning, as frost laced the windows, she found herself standing in the Duke's study. Dust had begun to settle on his books, his quills, the crystal decanter still half filled with brandy. The scent of him lingered faintly, leather, smoke, and something indefinably distant. She traced a finger over the spine of a ledger, feeling the dust cling to her glove. "If absence were love," she whispered, "then I would be adored." Yet resignation did not come naturally to her. Though her heart was wounded, her spirit was not broken. She began to walk the estate grounds each afternoon, speaking with tenants, listening to their troubles. She repaired roofs, ordered seed for the struggling farmers, and reopened the long-abandoned schoolhouse by the chapel. Children returned, their laughter spilling across the courtyard like sunlight through storm clouds. The villagers began to speak of her with affection, calling her our Duchess, a title more real than the one society bestowed. Months passed, and with them came a slow, strange peace. In the solitude of the countryside, Eleanor discovered that strength did not always roar, it sometimes whispered through small acts of grace. Yet London had not forgotten her, and London never forgave a woman who stopped playing its games. When spring came, so did the rumors. It began with a letter from Lady Agatha, written in her neat, trembling hand. "My dearest child," it read, "it is said in every drawing-room that you are living as a recluse, that His Grace has abandoned you. Some even whisper that your marriage is unconsummated. I beg of you, return to town, if only for the season. Silence is a dangerous companion." Eleanor folded the letter without reply. She had no desire to parade her dignity for the sake of gossip. Still, the words lingered, poisonous and familiar. By midsummer, a new scandal rippled through the ton. The Duke of Ravenshire had been seen escorting a widow to the opera, Lady Vane, known for her beauty and cruelty in equal measure. The tale reached Ravenshire Manor within a fortnight, carried by a servant's cousin from London. Eleanor's hands trembled when she heard it, though her face remained composed. That night, she sat alone in her chamber, staring at the flicker of candlelight across the window-pane. For the first time in months, tears threatened to fall, but she refused them. "If he finds comfort in shadows," she murmured, "then I shall seek light." A week later, a carriage arrived bearing a velvet box. Inside lay a necklace of sapphires, gleaming like fragments of midnight. The enclosed note was written in the Duke's hand, formal, cold, precise. "For your service to the estate. You have done well in my absence. R." For a long while she stared at the jewels, their beauty cruel in its indifference. Then she summoned her maid, sealed the box once more, and composed a reply in careful ink. "Your Grace, I thank you, but gratitude is not what I sought in marriage. Eleanor." The next morning, the carriage departed bearing the unopened gift. Within weeks, society erupted. Letters flew from one salon to another, whispers turned to open fascination. The Duchess of Ravenshire had returned her husband's token. Some called it insolence, others called it courage. The name Eleanor Whitmore, once spoken with pity, was now murmured with awe. And somewhere in a London club, the Duke read her letter by the dim light of a lamp. Those who were present swore his jaw tightened, that he said nothing for a long time, then rose and left without a word. Eleanor, unaware of his reaction, continued her quiet transformation. Her complexion, once pale from grief, had warmed under sunlight. She moved through the estate with renewed purpose, meeting with the steward, corresponding with charities, and planning a winter gathering for the villagers. The people adored her kindness. Even the oldest tenants swore that Ravenshire had never known such gentle governance. But solitude is a fickle companion. One evening, as she sat by the hearth, fatigue overcame her. A soft dizziness swept through her like a tide. The embroidery slipped from her hands. Her maid rushed forward as Eleanor pressed a trembling hand to her temple. When the physician arrived, his expression shifted from concern to awe. "Your Grace," he said softly, "you must rest. You are with child." The words lingered in the air like a bell tolling in the distance. For a moment she could not breathe. Then her hand fell to her still flat stomach, and a single tear escaped her lashes, not of sorrow, but of bewildered, fragile hope. "With child," she repeated, the words almost sacred. She dismissed the physician and sat long into the night, her thoughts tumbling like leaves in the wind. The Duke's face rose before her, cold yet hauntingly vivid. When dawn broke, she walked to the east garden, where frost still clung to the rose leaves. The world was silent but alive, as if listening to her heart. "If I am to bring his child into this world," she whispered, "then I shall do so with pride. He may have taken his love, but he will not take my dignity." And yet, beneath her newfound strength, something stirred, an ache that time could not quiet. For even as she promised herself independence, she could not still the faint, impossible hope that when the snows returned, he might come back too. The wind carried the first scent of approaching winter across the fields, cold and sharp, like memory itself. Eleanor turned toward the manor, her hand resting lightly over her heart, unaware that the turning of the seasons would soon bring with it the one man she had sworn to forget, and the reckoning both had long delayed. The first snow of December arrived like a whispered confession over the hills of Ravenshire. The manor, wreathed in frost and silence, seemed to hold its breath beneath the pale sky. Lady Eleanor stood by the window, her hand resting on the curve of her growing belly, watching the flakes drift against the glass. 6 months had passed since she last saw her husband, and in that time, she had learned to build a world of quiet endurance. Yet that morning, as the servants lit the hearths and the bells of the chapel tolled faintly in the distance, she felt an unfamiliar stirring, an unease that trembled through the air like a prelude to a storm. By dusk it came. The thunder of carriage wheels echoed through the frozen courtyard. Eleanor froze, her breath catching as she saw the Ravenshire crest glint beneath the lantern light. The doors burst open, and with them entered the Duke of Ravenshire, tall, dark-coated, the cold still clinging to his shoulders. Time had not softened him. His face bore the same proud austerity, yet his eyes, those unreadable gray eyes, seemed shadowed by something new. "Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the storm in her chest. He inclined his head slightly, the gesture more habit than sentiment. "I trust my arrival is not inconvenient." "You are at home, my lord," she answered, though her heart beat painfully. He removed his gloves slowly, studying her, and when his gaze fell upon her form, his composure faltered. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. "You are expecting." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Yes. 6 months." A silence hung between them, deep and fragile. The fire crackled softly, casting gold across the room. He looked away first. "You might have written to me." "I did not know where you might receive it," she replied. "And I thought, perhaps, you would prefer the silence you left me with." The word struck him harder than she intended. He moved toward the window, his voice quieter now. "London is a city built to forget. I did not expect to return." "Then why have you?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "Because the world speaks of you, Eleanor. Of your kindness. Of your defiance. I had to see it for myself." She felt the faintest tremor of bitterness. "You left a stranger at your hearth, and are astonished she became something more than a ghost." He turned then, his expression unreadable. "I left because I thought it kinder than cruelty." "You mistake abandonment for mercy," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. The firelight flickered between them, and for a moment neither spoke. He studied her face as though seeing it for the first time, the calm strength in her eyes, the dignity she wore like armor. The girl he had married had been soft, uncertain. The woman before him now was something far greater. That evening, they dined together in the grand hall for the first time since their wedding night. The air was heavy with unspoken words. The Duke, ever formal, asked after the estate, her health, her comfort. Eleanor answered with measured grace, though her gaze seldom met his. Only once did she see his mask slip, when she mentioned the schoolhouse and the children's Christmas gathering. A faint smile crossed his lips, fleeting but real. "You've done more for this place in half a year than I in a lifetime," he said quietly. "You gave me solitude," she replied. "It left me little choice but purpose." After dinner, she excused herself and retreated to the library, a sanctuary of warm lamplight and shelves lined with dust and memory. She stood before the window once more, watching the snow fall thicker now, each flake illuminated by the glow of the fire. Behind her, she heard his footsteps, slow, deliberate. "I had forgotten how quiet it is here," he said. "You left before you could listen," she answered without turning. He drew closer. Eleanor, when I married you, I believed I was incapable of affection. I thought I could fulfill my duty and nothing more." She faced him then, her eyes glistening with restrained sorrow. "And did you succeed?" "No," he said softly. "You invaded every silence I tried to keep." Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. He stepped nearer, the distance between them dissolving. "When word reached me of your letter," he continued, "that you had sent back the necklace, I was furious, not because of the insult, but because it forced me to see myself through your eyes, a man who had made a wife unworthy of his care." Her breath trembled. "And what did you see, my lord?" "A coward," he confessed. "One who feared love more than loneliness." For the first time since his return, his voice carried no pride, only weariness. Eleanor felt her resolve tremble, torn between compassion and the hurt that had become her only defense. "You wounded me deeply," she whispered. "But I have learned to live without you. I do not know if I can learn to live with you again." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers but not daring to touch. "You are stronger than I deserve," he said. "And yet, I ask, will you allow me to remain for Christmas?" Her gaze dropped to the fire. "For the child's sake," she said finally. "You may stay." He bowed his head in silent gratitude. As he turned to leave, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do not mistake forgiveness for forgetfulness, Your Grace. Some wounds do not fade with winter." He paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed by the glow of the hearth. "Then let me earn what time will not grant." When he was gone, Eleanor sank into the chair by the fire, her hand resting upon her womb. The snow outside had thickened into a silent storm, wrapping the world in white. She could still hear the echo of his voice, low and uncertain, like the sound of a heart remembering how to beat. For the first time since her wedding, she allowed herself to hope, but only a little. Love, she had learned, was not the fire that consumed but the ember that endured, hidden beneath ash until the right wind stirred it again. And though she told herself she did not believe him, her pulse betrayed her, steady, expectant, alive. Somewhere above, the bells of Ravenshire tolled for the midnight hour. The Duchess lifted her gaze toward the darkened window, watching the snow swirl and settle. It seemed to her that the world, like her heart, was waiting for morning, for mercy, for what must come next. The days that followed the Duke's return unfolded beneath an unrelenting blanket of snow. Ravenshire lay hushed beneath winter's weight, its gardens buried and its fountains frozen into crystalline stillness. Within the manor, warmth flickered in small corners. The library, the nursery chamber being prepared, the drawing room where Lady Eleanor sat each afternoon with embroidery she seldom touched. Silence was her companion, though now it was no longer peace but expectancy. Every footstep in the corridor seemed to carry the chance of him. The Duke, for his part, moved like a man haunted by his own house. He oversaw repairs, spoke with servants, and pretended a sense of purpose. Yet all of it was pretense. Each evening his gaze found its way to the east wing, where Eleanor's chamber light glowed faintly through the frost. He would stop at the foot of the stairs and turn back, unwilling to intrude. It had become a ritual of repentance, a silent admission that he had not yet earned the right to speak freely to her heart. 3 nights before Christmas, the storm broke. The winds tore through the moors, and the manor groaned under its assault. A fire in the west wing chimney roared too fiercely, filling the corridors with smoke. Eleanor, restless and pale, hurried down to assist despite the servants' protests. When the Duke found her in the hall, her hair loose, her gown smudged with soot, something in him fractured. He crossed the space between them, his voice tight with concern. "You should not be here. And you should not have left," she interrupted, her tone trembling. He froze, struck by the sudden rawness in her voice. The servants withdrew, leaving only the echo of wind and the hiss of embers between them. "I cannot bear your silence any longer," she said, clutching the edge of the mantel for balance. "You stand near and yet remain oceans away. Do you think I have forgotten? I remember every letter unanswered, every night the house grew colder without you. He took a step forward, snow still clinging to his coat. I thought my absence would free you from my shadow. It did not, she whispered. It only taught me to live with it. Something shifted then, a truth too long suppressed found voice. He reached for her hands, and when she did not pull away, he held them as though they were fragile relics of a past he dared to believe in again. Eleanor, when I left Ravenshire, I was a man at war with myself, he said quietly. You were light in a house built for ghosts. I thought if I stayed, I would only darken you. She searched his face, her tears unfallen but glimmering in the firelight. And yet, you come back now, what do you seek? Forgiveness? Redemption? No, he said, shaking his head. I seek a beginning. Her breath hitched. A beginning requires trust, and you broke mine. He closed his eyes briefly, as though bracing against the blow. Then let me earn it, not with promises but with constancy. Let me stay, through this winter and every one to come. The storm outside howled against the windows, its fury answering the silence between them. Eleanor turned toward the flames, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and longing. Could love rebloom in the soil of disappointment? Could one who had left truly return, not in body but in spirit? The Duke's voice softened, a confession trembling at its edge. When I rode away that night, I carried your letter in my coat. I read it every mile until the ink bled in the rain. You wrote that you would rather face the cold alone than share a home without warmth. I thought it was a dismissal, but it was truth. You asked for a husband, not a title. You deserved one, and I was too proud to become him. Her hand flew to her lips, the memory of that letter searing. She had written it in despair, never knowing it would wound him deeply enough to make him vanish. And what are you now? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. He took her hand again, pressing it to his chest where his heart beat fast and unguarded. A man who has walked through every shadow of his own making and found only one light that remained, you. The fire burned lower, the storm's rage fading into the sound of steady snow. Eleanor looked up at him, her expression torn between resistance and recognition. Slowly, she withdrew her hand and pressed it against her womb. Then you must prove it not to me, but to the life we created. Words cannot cradle a child. He nodded, solemn and sincere. Then I will prove it with every dawn that follows. In the days that followed, he did not make grand gestures. Instead, he began to live as though her trust could be rebuilt through quiet devotion. He rose early to walk the grounds with the steward, ensuring warmth in every servant's quarter. He brought books to the library she loved, choosing ones with stories of endurance and grace. When she sat by the fire, he would read aloud, his deep voice smoothing over the wounds between them. Gradually, the distance softened, not vanished, but lessened, like ice cracking under the slow persistence of spring. On Christmas morning, the world awoke in stillness. The sun broke through the frost, casting gold upon the snowdrifts. The household gathered in the chapel, where candles glowed like small stars. Eleanor sat in the front pew, her hands folded, her expression composed but tender. When the Duke entered beside her, the murmurs hushed. He did not stand at a distance as before. He knelt beside her, head bowed, his presence no longer cold but reverent. After the service, they walked through the gardens, the air sharp and crystalline. She paused beneath the old yew tree where he had once proposed years ago, a memory both painful and precious. Turning to face him, she said quietly, "Perhaps some winters do end." He smiled faintly. "And some hearts thaw slower than others. I will wait for yours as long as the seasons demand." She studied him then, the sincerity in his eyes, the humility that had replaced pride. For the first time, she believed him. "You left me once," she said softly. "If you ever do again, I shall not forgive you a second time." "Then I will never give you cause," he vowed. She nodded, a tear slipping free, not of sorrow but release. "Then let us begin, as you said, not as strangers, but as husband and wife. He reached out, and this time, when his fingers brushed hers, she did not pull away. Their hands met, warm despite the cold. Around them, the snow began to fall again, light and slow, not cruel but cleansing. The world seemed to hold its breath, as though blessing their quiet reconciliation. Inside the manor, the fire burned high, and laughter echoed faintly from the hall. But outside, beneath the winter sky, two souls, once divided by silence, stood together at last. Not in perfection, but in peace. And as the bells of Ravenshire rang through the valley, Eleanor felt life stir within her once more, not only in her womb, but in her heart. The past would not vanish, but it would no longer bind her. The Duke's hand tightened gently around hers, and when she looked up, she saw no stranger, no ghost, only the man who had finally come home. The snow continued to fall, soft and endless, erasing the old footprints between them, leaving only one path forward, shared, uncertain, and beautifully alive.